If you've been paying any sort of attention to this channel or my social media of late, you will know I have been playing a little game called The Between. Well, me and my players have just brought our campaign to an end, and not only has it been the greatest single role-playing experience I've ever had, The Between has completely rewired my brain and fundamentally changed how I think about games. So, what is The Between? Well, it's a role playing game written by Jason Cordova, loosely based on the Powered by the Apocalypse system about monster hunters in Victorian London. And that simple pitch was enough to get me to buy it. I thought it sounded like a cool concept, and I assumed it was something akin to Monster of the Week, but with a League of Extraordinary Gentlemen type vibe. I picked it up in a bundle, and like a lot of games I pick up in bundles, it sat in my drive-through library for about 9 months unread. And then I actually did read it, and I realised that The Between was something very, very different, and dare I say it, wholly unique. Yes, it is a game about monster hunters in Victorian London based on the Powered by the Apocalypse system, but there are several features that set this game apart and make it a very different proposition and an absolutely extraordinary experience. Now, brace yourselves, because here comes a list. Here's 7 reasons why The Between is my favourite tabletop role-playing game. The Between is so titled because we meet the player characters, or hunters as they are called, as they find themselves caught between their mysterious pasts and even more tragic possible futures. As such, the hunters are deliberately occluded, and the rules explicitly state that the most important thing in the game is that it is absolutely forbidden for the players to talk about their characters' backstories unless prompted to do so by the game's mechanics. Now, those mechanics are super interesting, but more on those later. Character creation only takes about 15 minutes and essentially boils down to choosing a playbook that you think is interesting and making a few basic first starting choices. These aren't characters you will write a big backstory for then play. No, the game is structured so you and the rest of the table will get to know your hunter as you play and slowly reveal elements about their pasts at the most dramatically interesting moments possible. In The Between, narrative authority is shared, and as the campaign progresses, the spotlight gets shined on the hunters in intense, hyper-focused ways, and slowly discovering more about them as the game goes on gives the campaign a slow-burning feel and carries an emotional weight like nothing I have ever played. I love the idea of mysteries in role-playing games, but I've always found the practice deeply frustrating both as a player and as a GM. More often than not, you end up with a pre-written mystery designed around players visiting certain places and speaking to certain people in order to discover certain things that lead them to a certain conclusion that you have written down on your piece of paper. Now, The Between is not only powered by the apocalypse, it is also carved from Brindlewood, meaning that it takes its clue and investigation mechanics from Brindlewood Bay, a game also written by Jason Cordova. In The Between, the players are investigating cases known as threats, and they usually are investigating 3 of these at any one time. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. And this is all they are. They are 2 sides of A4, and listed here is a hook to draw the hunters in, a question they are trying to answer about the threat, a few notable side characters and locations, and some background details. And there is also a long list of clues, and these clues are intentionally vague, but also incredibly flavourful. And the cool thing is that they are flexible enough to be discovered pretty much anywhere and at any time. So as a GM, or keeper as they are called in The Between, you never have to steer the players towards any one place or person to find any one clue. It happens completely organically, and here's the best thing. The threats have no canonical explanation. It doesn't say anywhere on the sheet what the solution to the threat is. It is completely up to the players to string together these disparate, seemingly unrelated clues and crack the case. And this is one of my favourite parts of playing The Between, watching a player say, Do you know what? I think I've got a theory for this. And it will start with them maybe loosely linking together 2 or 3 clues, and then everyone else around the table will begin to pitch in, and someone will tie another clue in and another clue, and then it just snowballs into a solution that somehow ends up making perfect sense. And it's pretty amazing to watch as the keeper, and from behind the screen you also get to contribute. And I also like to try and poke holes in their theory by saying things like, well, what about the albino peacock in the cage? How does that tie into it? And then you just watch as the players go, well, actually, no, that is the most important thing. And that's going to crack this whole case wide open. And then you watch them as they try and slot that into the solution. And honestly, seeing that play out is incredible. And I made sure that all my players had their clues written on little index cards. So it really became this kind of madcap, frantic conspiracy mindset with the players losing their minds as they link all these clues together with red string. It is so much fun to watch. The playbooks in the between are nearly all based on archetypes from Gothic literature, and each playbook is somewhat asymmetric. And whilst they all feature the same basic layout, stats and inventory, each playbook has its own unique mechanic driving it. The Mother is a playbook that revolves around the macabre minigame of collecting body parts for the child, a monstrous experiment they plan to bring to life by the campaign's end. The Undeniable has a secret masterwork hidden somewhere in London that is scarred every time they do something evil. And the American is hiding a dreadful secret. They are cursed and have a beast inside them, and they must struggle each night to keep it under control. And the playbooks all build towards these big, cinematic, dramatic moments, and the players must try and make them memorable. And this all might seem really specific, like prescriptive almost, as if each character already has a predestined arc, but this is absolutely not the case. What this actually does is give the players a structure within which to explore a character in intense detail and focus on telling the best, most interesting, most emotionally resonant version of their story that they can. And those moments, good God. In our game, the scene in which the American succumbed to his curse and had to ask another hunter to help him keep it under control was frightening and intense, but also tender and heartbreaking. And our mother, when she brought life to the child, we spent weeks building up to that moment, and it was so beautifully played. It was so full of grief, longing, and regret, and it hit so hard. And the players all know these moments are right there on their playbooks, and part of the fun and challenge is what they bring to those moments. So the playbooks at first glance seem to be pretty tight, maybe even restrictive, but there is an awful lot of flexibility in there, and you can tell pretty much any sort of story you want with any combination of playbooks. It is also worth noting that pretty much all the hunters are dreadful people, like you are playing the baddies. In the case of the Undeniable, they are way more villainous than even the worst threat or mastermind in the game. And the Explorer, well, they are straight up just an irredeemable piece of shit. But really fun to play. So I mentioned the players are forbidden from discussing their characters' past or backstories unless prompted by the game's mechanics to do so. Now the first of those mechanics is called the vulnerable move, which isn't even really a move at all. It's more a pure role-playing scene in which two hunters share an intimate moment, and the conclusion of those scenes can end in one hunter inviting a question about their past from the other. The second mechanic that can prompt the hunter's backstory to be revealed is called the Janus Mask. Whenever dice are rolled and players are unsatisfied by the result or want to increase its potency, they may mark off one of the 12 Janus masks on their playbook. Mechanically, this improves the dice result one step, so a failure becomes a mixed success becomes a full success, and so on. But marking a mask has a narrative cost. Every playbook has two sorts of Janus mask, a mask of the past and a mask of the future. If a player marks a mask of the past, they are prompted to narrate a flashback from their character's backstory. If they mark a mask of the future, they must give us a glimpse of a fate that they may succumb to. This is an incredibly potent way of delivering exposition and backstory, as they usually come at the most dramatic moment possible as a result of a failure. And in play, the keeper will narrate the full consequence of the original roll. So in some cases, that might mean narrating the death of a hunter who made the roll if the stakes are high enough. The player then may choose to mark a mask, narrate their prompt, and then the keeper will then frame up a new, different outcome, and you carry on playing. It is very, very cool, and some of the best parts of our campaign came from these incredibly tense moments where a dice roll goes bad, and then I took great pleasure describing the grisly consequences. Then a player will mark a mask and deliver a highly emotional flashback. Then we return to the fiction, with the previous outcome just a glimpse of what might have been. And as masks are finite, they also act as a timer. There are no hit points in the between, but once a hunter has marked all their masks, their story is over. And every hunter has a mask that, when marked, asks them to narrate a scene in which they are physically destroyed. So in this game, it is the players who have full control over if and when their character dies. They are in ultimate control of their tragic fates. I mentioned earlier that the spotlight shines on the players in intense and hyper-focused ways, and it is through the Janus mask that it does this. That spotlight can find you at any time, and the reins of the narrative can be thrust into your hands any minute, so you better be ready to tell your story. I have never played a role-playing game where the table has been more invested in what is going on as I have in the between. And a big part of that is how the game uses paint the scene questions. Now, I'm aware that other games have these, but the way the between utilizes them ensures total buy-in from the players in a way that I have never seen before. Now, if you don't know what a paint the scene question is, it is a question posed to the players by the keeper about a location or a situation, and it goes something like this. Let's say two hunters are visiting a mortuary. The keeper will look at the threat sheet and see the following brief description. A mortuary, brightly lit, the smell of chemicals, everything neatly arranged. And that is pretty much all they'll need to say. They might elaborate a little, but there's no real need to. Then comes the paint the scene question, which reads, is there a certain beauty in death? If so, what do you see that confirms this? And all the players answer this question out of character, even if their hunters might not be at that location or even ever go there. All players answer no matter what. And the questions are all framed in this way. It's not just like, hey, you're at the mortuary. What's that like? And I chose this example of the mortuary from the Sally No-Face threat because when we did this paint the scene for the mortuary in our game, the players took these prompts and in turn each delivered such poetically beautiful answers that we all sort of just stopped and let it sit for a moment, because all of a sudden this wasn't just a location, it wasn't a repository for clues, a place where the hunters go to find stuff out. It was a living, breathing place brought to life evocatively by engaged, committed, creative players, fully invested in collaboratively telling a story. Paint the scene questions are something I've started using in all my games, and I cannot recommend this technique highly enough. Perhaps the most unique feature of the Between is the unseen. Unlike other games, a session of the Between is structured into 4 distinct phases, each with their own rules and feel. Dawn is a brief upkeep phase, which is followed by the day, which is quite loose, where the hunters do what they want, they kind of investigate threats, they have scenes with each other, or go off and explore London. It's low stakes, where nothing too bad can happen. Dusk is a short planning phase before we move into the night, where shit gets real. The monstrous threats terrorizing London come out to play. The stakes are high, it's fast, it's tense, and it's dangerous. But during the night phase, something else is happening in parallel. The Keeper introduces a short vignette called The Unseen, and it's a vignette of something else happening concurrently in London, completely unrelated to what the hunters are doing. We cut back and forth between the hunters navigating the horrors of the night phase and the unseen, with each player taking a turn to narrate a prompt. And it happens at the most dramatic and tense moments. Dice might hit the table as a hunter does something risky or dangerous, and that roll is a failure. But before we resolve it, the Keeper will cut to another player who narrates their prompt from the unseen. And that's just cool anyway, right? That builds tension, and the way it does that is incredible. And on top of that, the unseens that you explore throughout the campaign will help the players vividly paint London as its own character. But here is the masterstroke. If you, as a player, can make a thematic or visual connection between the events of the night phase and the events of the unseen, you experience something called an echo in the night. And here's an example. In the night phase, one of the hunters might be facing off against a serial killer. They are attacked and the killer's knife slashes them across the chest, and they look down at their bloodied hands. We then cut to another player narrating a prompt from the unseen, where two families are sitting through a tense dinner party, and that player begins their narration with a maid cleaning up spilled red wine after an altercation leaves a bottle smashed on the floor. The wine, the blood, that is an echo in the night. It's a pretty heavy-handed one, but I think you get the point. And if you experience an echo in the night, you get XP. The rules of the game incentivize you to make connections in the narrative and build out the story in rich, thematically interesting ways, and all the players are looking for these, meaning every single night they are switched on, they are engaged, they are listening to what everyone else is saying, they are hanging on every word with the ultimate goal of making the story and the world richer. As I said, that is a masterstroke. Yeah, so running this game has taught me a lot. I've never really been one for pre-written adventures, so I was a little on edge about being constrained by the threats, even though they are just two sides of A4. But what I discovered was being the Keeper is like walking a high wire every single night. There's no need to prep a session, maybe just read the threats and remind yourself about what happened last time, but that is really it. And even though the threats are pretty sparse, there is so much to work with. These threats are really just a bundle of narrative threads, and it is up to you as Keeper to see which ones the players want to pull on. There are side characters, locations, and thematic moments listed on each threat sheet. Locations get a sentence and a paint the scene question like we saw. And characters get 3 descriptors, a couple of sentences about who they are, and a quote, which kind of gives you an idea of what they might sound like. But that is it. And whilst these side character details are brief, they are incredibly evocative. There is enough there to make them unique and interesting, but so much blank space to play with. So they can really become anything. Any one story element on a threat can become as big a part of the total story as you want. And many threats that I ran during our 13-week campaign, like we didn't even use half the characters on there, but if the players did find something interesting in a side character, if they wanted to pull on that thread, then you need to be ready, because that character or location might about to become a pivotal part of the story, or maybe even the most important part of the entire campaign. And this happened in our game. A side character from a threat that on the page appears to be nothing more than a bit of comic relief ended up becoming obsessed with our undeniable, so much so that they wrote a play about her. Then, as a consequence of a bad roll on a completely unrelated threat, that side character got turned into a vampire, and the undeniable became obsessed with him and spent the entire back half of the campaign ignoring all the other active, pressing threats, trying to find this lost and wretched soul in the darkened alleyways and opium dens of London's East End. And it became such a big deal. That side character became central to the entire campaign's grand finale and also the undeniable story arc. And that took place over, I think, the course of 7 sessions and came just from a name, 3 descriptors, a couple of sentences, and a quote. And this is the great thing about this game. You go on the Gauntlet Discord and you can read about other people's campaigns, and even though they might run the same playbooks and threats, no 2 games are ever the same. Like, characters who never get mentioned in our campaign might be the most important person in someone else's. Threats play out in wildly different ways, and the mastermind confrontations are totally unique. Running this game is such a thrill. You can pick it up with no prep and have just enough of a safety net. You have this immense freedom to really flex your storytelling muscles. And the campaign structure is such that the keeper has to write the finale. The campaign is a series of these threats, but behind the scenes is a dastardly criminal mastermind pulling the strings. The hunter's goal is to stop them before they can enact their evil plan, but when you begin, the hunters and the keeper have absolutely no idea what the plan is. The mastermind is slowly drip-fed into the story, and when you pass a specific threshold number of clues, the main story winds down and the hunters must face them. But the keeper has to write that final threat, pulling on all of the story elements accrued over the previous 10 to 12 sessions, crafting a bespoke finale for your table. And at the start of the campaign, I was like, absolutely not. I cannot write this threat. The ones that you run are so masterfully written, there's no way I can do that. But by the time you come to sit down and actually write it, you have learned so much about the way that threats are structured. It comes pretty easily, and I think I wrote the whole thing in about an hour. As keeper, you are uniquely positioned to write the perfect showdown for your hunters. And our mastermind confrontation was amazing. It was the culmination of all the story beats and narrative threads that my players so wonderfully brought to life, all tied up in a sapphire blue bow. And I will honestly be thinking about this campaign we just finished for a long, long time. So yeah, I think you may have picked up on the fact that I really like The Between, and I could talk about it pretty much all day, and I have. I have shoehorned it into pretty much any vaguely related conversation I've had in the past 7 months. You can buy it now, and I'll throw a link down below, but there is also a new revised version coming to Kickstarter soon. And when that goes live, back at day 1, you won't regret it, because it is absolutely fucking brilliant. And that's it from me this week. Please like this video, subscribe, and do check out the Bad Spot Patreon, where you will get early access to all episodes, exclusive behind the scenes content, and your name on screen like these lovely people. I'll be back next time, but until then, it is farewell and safe passage.